Perfect. Mr. Shimko. Zev, how we doing, buddy?
Doing awesome, Bobby. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I am doing excellent, thanks. I am actually enjoying some of the birthday present you sent me, a little whistle pig in an old fashioned. It's fantastic. So thank you for the birthday present. I appreciate it.
Hey, great to hear. No problem.
So you've had a super exciting kind of last, 12 months or so, kind of transitioning in, and now the chief operating officer at Avanti, and they've kind of are in a super unique space. And why don't you just kind of chat about kind of that venture?
Sure. Yeah. So maybe for some quick background, I started off my career in traditional investment banking and really helping companies raise capital either through debt capital markets or equity capital markets. And then I always had a feeling that I wanted to get to smaller companies, wanted to help move the needle a bit more than I was at the bank. Mm-hmm. So I went off to a few startups and fintech companies in San Francisco. And then I stumbled across Bitcoin, right? So this digital asset, this new digital money. And I thought it was super interesting. Took me a while to really understand what it was and how valuable it could be. But after a couple of years of being in the space, I went to Denver to go work for a digital asset company and help lead a lot of their business development initiatives, mm-hmm. Which really just got me hooked. I love this new digital asset space. I thought these virtual currencies were super interesting, and I knew that I wanted to stay in the field. Right. About 8 months ago, I was working at a company in San Francisco when I got a call from one of my old colleagues, actually. She was starting a new bank for the digital asset space. Importantly, it's actually planning to be one of the first banks to actually offer services, not only on the traditional dollar side that you're used to getting from your banks, but also on the digital asset side. And so, for example, for Bitcoin, for our customers would be able to offer, Bitcoin custody and Bitcoin services, as well as dollar services, right? Which is just not offered by banks today at all. So we formed the company back in January of this year. It's been a lot of work, a lot of late nights, but we're going after, becoming a bank. And so we've applied to be a banking institution in Wyoming. We've had our charter application accepted by our regulator, which is all public news, so not telling you anything that I'm not supposed to be sharing. And we're still waiting for final approval. So we have a little bit of wood to chop on that front, but we plan to launch before the end of this year. So we'll be one of the first banks in the US. Again, they'll be able to provide your normal banking services as well as new digital asset services for the world of Bitcoin and other digital assets as it evolves.
So digital asset services, for those out there that are not really too on the ball or aware of that, obviously most people in this day and age are aware of Bitcoin, but they're not really too sharp on digital assets and how to really use that.
Sure. So Bitcoin is a digital asset, right? So let's just stick with that example.
Sure.
In simple terms, it's like digital money, right? So I can either send you US dollars, right? I can send you other currencies, or I can send you Bitcoin, right? If I wanted to pay you in Bitcoin for something. Now, for me to hold Bitcoin today, I need to be a little bit tech savvy. I might need a hardware wallet, which kind of looks like a USB stick, or I can use a company like Coinbase that is retail focused. I can create an account and I can buy Bitcoin. For institutions that need to work with banks just for regulatory reasons, for legal clarity, a lot of those types of firms, and these are your larger traditional firms, right? So large asset managers, pension funds, endowments, et cetera. Although they want exposure to Bitcoin, many of them haven't purchased Bitcoin because they simply are not able to gain access through a bank, right? They can't work with an unregulated company or a less regulated company in order to actually get exposure to different types of virtual currencies like Bitcoin. And so we'll be the first bank offering these services and offering the ability for our customers to essentially buy Bitcoin for dollars. Down the road, and I say digital assets as more of a broad term, right? This could be, digital, for example, digital equities, digital bonds, other virtual currencies. You may have heard of Ethereum.
Yeah, Ethereum. And what's the other one? Doge is pretty popular, right?
Yeah, there are actually a couple thousand, but Doge is, certainly one of the more popular ones as well.
So what's the advantage if I'm don't know what to be doing with my assets, what's the advantage for me to be going into digital assets compared to just the typical, you're putting savings away in the bank or you're just using typical currency? What's the advantage for me?
Sure. So obviously, some people might buy Bitcoin because they think the value is going to increase, right? And it has over the last 10 or 12 years.
Definitely.
So Bitcoin has gone. It was invented in 2008, right? Obviously at the start, it didn't have any value. It didn't have this market capitalization of the asset, and it's now worth over all the Bitcoins out in circulation is worth over $200 billion with a B. Right. So obviously there's been this value creation, which has gotten a lot of folks interested in owning some simply because they think it's going to appreciate in value. And then the question is, okay, why is this going to appreciate in value? Like, what is Bitcoin? What kind of technology is it? And it's really a different type of asset, right? But it's not backed by a government. It's not the United States standing behind Bitcoin saying that we'll always redeem Bitcoin for money. It's really backed by a network of computers and really mathematics. And so essentially, they're very rough estimates as to the number of computers that essentially verify all these transactions. But there's, maybe 1 million computers verifying all these Bitcoin transactions worldwide. And what that allows me to do, because it's decentralized or distributed, it's not owned by a central organization, I can send you Bitcoin, which will be confirmed by the network itself, right? So you don't have Bank of America, asking if Zev is able to send Bobby Bitcoin, then they have to confirm it. It takes a couple of days to settle that transaction. I can literally, in a peer-to-peer fashion, so person-to-person fashion, I can send to anyone in the world Bitcoin, and they can receive Bitcoin in a matter of minutes. And all the computers that are verifying these transactions will all agree that I sent that person Bitcoin, and that they now own this Bitcoin.
And then it's also, there's always kind of a receipt of it. So there's always somewhere it's in a database. Yeah. The mafia probably wouldn't be a big fan of Bitcoin because it would be essentially traceable, right? There's always at least a record showing like, hey, you sent me money or you sent me Bitcoin, I sent you Bitcoin. There's always kind of a record of it.
Yeah, so you can actually trace Bitcoin, through the blockchain, which is essentially the database, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so exactly where the Bitcoin is. And in some cases, you might not know who owns it, but you know where it is. And it's actually very, very trackable, which is why a lot of companies are looking to use Bitcoin and other virtual currencies in, supply chain tracking and other similar types of activities.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. If you want to see where your money's going and making sure that, especially if you're a bigger company, it seems to make a lot of sense because there's always, whether you're restaurant industry or something like, you deal with so much shrinkage in that a lot of those businesses that definitely seems to make sense. Now, what's the drive? What kind of brought you into the digital assets? What was it about that kind of like made the light bulb go off and like, hey, I really kind of enjoy this and kind of got you out of the traditional financial assets and stuff like that?
Sure. So I learned about Bitcoin when I was working at a bank in the past, so my first job out of school. And at that time, I didn't understand the technology behind it. So I thought, okay, this is an interesting speculative asset, meaning it can go up and down in value. And maybe if I buy some Bitcoin, I'll make some money, right? But I didn't know why it goes up in value. I didn't know how it worked. There were a lot of things that were still unknown to me. And it took a couple of years, and it wasn't until I actually moved out to San Francisco and started working with more of the software engineering type and technologists that I really started to learn about Bitcoin and why it worked, right? And I learned about this network of computers, and I learned that it was distributed, and I learned that nobody controlled Bitcoin. There's actually only a finite number of Bitcoin that will ever be, mined in circulation. So unlike, normal money, if the government needs more, they might just print more, right? And they can print more indefinitely. You can't just print more Bitcoin. Right, so a certain number of Bitcoin gets released into circulation, but it'll actually stop at 21 million Bitcoin, and we're at about 18.5 million today. And so there is this finite supply, and that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. And so I thought this concept of it's effectively money or currency backed by technology and math was super, super interesting. And when I started to read about how it worked and why it worked, I just wanted to jump in further, right? So knowing that it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, really to hack Bitcoin, right? Yeah. You can't just guess somebody's, password, so to speak, and steal their funds. It's incredibly secure. And a lot of the security behind that is because of the cryptography involved that, backs a lot of other things in this world, not just digital currencies.
So what
And then,
else is it that kind of makes
yeah,
it so secure for me? Like if I have no idea, I mean, I have my little USB stick. What is it? What is making it so kind of encrypted and secure for me to not have to worry about it?
yeah. So when you mentioned database earlier, for example, typically in the normal world with, normal funds, if you're sending money via Venmo or PayPal or your bank,
Hmm.
they're really the only ones with that ledger, right? So, maybe Venmo is the only one that knows that you sent money from, Alice to Bob,
Sure.
right? In Bitcoin, everybody actually validates that transaction. And so let's say that, Venmo were to go bust,
Hmm.
you might have a hard time getting your money back,
Right.
right? But with
Hmm.
Bitcoin, as long as you control, what's called your keys that essentially control, the Bitcoin or essentially access to the Bitcoin, you have full security and full control over your Bitcoin. So nobody can steal that from you. Nobody can, tell you that you didn't send Bitcoin from one person to another. It's actually fully auditable by
Hmm.
really anybody who has internet, assuming they know where to look, right? So they would need your address, your wallet ID in order to actually view that transaction. But if you wanted to show the world that you sent money from A to B, you can put that transaction up and you can share it with anybody you want and everybody can confirm it, right? So it's this, new type of, money or currency that's just backed by technology. It's backed by, a network
Yeah.
that really just and theoretically could be hacked, but it's extremely difficult and extremely unlikely that it ever would. And again that you have full control, right? So you can take your Bitcoin, you can go somewhere else. A government can't, seize your Bitcoin, right?
Hmm.
They can't, force you to send it to them.
Right.
They can't block you from sending Bitcoin. So literally, if you have internet, you can send and receive Bitcoin.
Hmm.
So again, it's really this, freedom from traditional government, right? And I think when Bitcoin started out, right, you had some interesting use cases for Bitcoin. You would see it on the dark web. You would see it, with online gambling. But it's gone mainstream, right? You have hedge funds today that trade Bitcoin. You have investment managers that will invest in Bitcoin on behalf of their limited partners and family offices. You have companies that lend against Bitcoin and other assets, right? So the same way that
Yeah.
you can borrow money against your car or your house, you can borrow money against Bitcoin. There are other types of investment opportunities. You can put a portion of your 401k into Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right? So it's really gone mainstream over the last 12 years, which is why institutions are starting to take notice and come into the space, which
Hmm.
is why Avanti was formed to actually provide services in the digital asset space for these larger customers that are looking to get exposure and looking to get access.
Right. Now going in, because I mean, all of this that you kind of have going on right now with being at the forefront and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I mean, there's so much work on a daily basis that you're definitely grinding it out. I mean, what kind of what do you do to stay on target? What kind of keeps you on track? Helps you take care of your bullet points every day? Is it your iPhone? You got reminders? Hey, I need to do this, this, and this, and you kind of prioritize from there. Or are you a note taker? What kind of helps you attack the day?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and this may be a weird answer, but it's really just, putting the, things you're working on into perspective. And so I think quite often you come across, hiccups during the day or potentially problems or issues, but understanding that they're all really fixable, right? I mean, unless it's
Yeah.
a massive problem, right? Take a step back and just figure out how to move past it, right? So whether, when we started out, we needed to hire people. Great. Okay, we figured out a hiring plan and we're able to bring on more employees, and that's fantastic, right? And then you need to
Mhm.
set up health insurance. It's like, okay, how do you do that? And you figure all these things out, right? And sometimes you're actually creating new products and doing things for the first time, but just understanding that you're going to have these difficulties in building a business, and you're going to find the solutions. I think is very important. If you get hung up on a lot of the small things or some hiccups along the way, it's I think really going to throw your day off. And I don't think it's a normal day unless I run into at least a handful of hiccups.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's always just so many that I think you have to run into, right? As you're starting like a new company, and this is kind of not the first time for you going through this. I mean, you've been through a few different startups, right? With like Upstart out in San Francisco, and then
Sure.
with Salt and all these. So it's not like it's new for you. Is that pretty exciting? Kind of going through another startup and kind of being able to create the business.
Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. And I think what people need to realize that if you have a general idea of how a business operates or what you want to do and you put in the effort, you can figure it out.
Mhm.
right? Salt and the companies in San Francisco, which Upstart and Prosper. I mean, those were things that I hadn't done, before joining those companies. And whether it's raising capital from investors, whether it's, representing the company internationally at a conference, or um, educating politicians or academics. I mean, these are all things that I did for the first time. And just having a general understanding of finance, quite frankly, really opened that door. And then, yes, it might take some time to understand what you need to do to figure out the solutions, but it's all very possible and in reach.
Right.
I like to deal with those types of challenges. I started out in a bank where you're basically, told what to do, and it was very clear what your day looked like. And you
Mhm.
can work very hard, very long hours, and it's challenging work, and it's great. I recommend starting in a bank really for anybody, but you don't really need to necessarily think outside the box or try to solve a problem that you had never come across. And so being in these startups really opened up my mind to, what types of things I could do, what types of things I can figure out. It sounds a little cheesy, but really how to build a business, right? I mean, if you want to start a business of your own, I mean, there are a lot of little things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, right?
Yeah.
Okay, do you need insurance? How do you bring on these employees? What states are they in? Do you need a payroll provider? Okay, now you need to start building technology. How do you secure that technology? Do you need to get audits, right? Both on the technology side and the accounting side, right? And there's lots of, housekeeping administrative items that you just, wouldn't even think of. So
Yeah.
I think being at smaller companies, having those types of positions really just gives you more exposure and makes you more of a versatile team player.
Now, what about that? Because there is something, you have to take that plunge, right? I mean, it's kind of that sink or swim. When you're going out and, you kind of being told, right? It's very cookie cutter. You do this, you do this, you do that. And then you kind of go to San Francisco and now you have that freedom. And is that exciting, or is there a little bit of fear when you kind of go? Is there a fear of failure, or is it just like this? What's kind of the attitude and mindset when you're going into that?
Sure. I think looking back, it was definitely exciting. When I first made the leap from investment banking to startup land,
Hmm.
there was certainly a little bit of an adjustment, right? It almost felt like you were running around with your head cut off, or perhaps everybody's running around with their heads cut off, and
Yeah.
you're wearing all these different hats. And you might be in a finance role, but now you need to do some operations, or you might need to help out the legal team. And really, you have a lot more collaboration amongst different groups, right? Which turned out to be a really great thing. You learn a lot about different areas of the business, but I wasn't used to that, right? And so
Yeah.
all I knew initially when I made the move was, look, I want a new challenge. And then when I got to the small company, all of a sudden you're the one responsible for bringing in the money, right? Or raising capital, or doing whatever it is that you need to do.
Hmm.
Whereas at a bank or a large company, you might have 10, 20 people working on the same thing. So you
Yeah.
get a lot more individual responsibility, but that also means more accountability, right? So if you mess up, it kind of sucks a little more, to be honest, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
people notice that, and
So
on
what's
the
the
flip side,
first
you also
one?
get
What's the
rewarded.
first one when you're going in there and you're like, oh boy, I fucked that up?
Oh man, let's see here. I think when deals just don't go your way, or deal doesn't close, you just take the personal, weight on your shoulders, right? It
Sure. Yeah.
potentially is something you said, it's
Hmm.
something you did wrong. Maybe you could have done something better and you really don't know. I think at a bank you say, well, our team tried, or the bank tried. But
Hmm.
when you're at a small company, it's okay, I tried and I messed up, or I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a lot more responsibility, which is great for learning, great for picking up new skills. But when things don't go well, and you take the majority of the weight on your shoulders, it doesn't feel great, obviously.
Right. So what has kind of helped you kind of persevere through that? Because you've had a bunch of different stops and you've learned a lot, and it's not always going to be good times, when you're out and you're competing, and there are days when you have a good day competing, and there's other days you
Sure.
ski like crap. And you used to be a former competitive skier, so you know that all too well. And so what kind of helps you grow and move forward from those
Yeah,
mistakes?
keywords there. Former competitive skier. I now call myself a recreational skier.
Everyone's gonna be a
Um,
former one sooner or later.
That's true. Good point. But it's honestly, it's not too dissimilar from back in the skiing days, when you have a really good competition day and you place well and you feel really good about all the work that you put in. On the flip side to everything I said before, when you do close a deal, when you do get a new client, when you do build a new partnership, bring money in the company, I mean that's because of you, right? And
Right.
there are some things in the past that perhaps I helped the company, move forward further. Perhaps I gave them another few months of runway. Perhaps they got a higher valuation or more visibility. And it's kind of hard sometimes to evaluate what your impacts are there. But I think, again, it's the wins that you have that keep it going, because in any externally facing roles, whether it's sales or business development or corporate development or really anything in investment banking or the sell side, it's a numbers game in some ways, right? And so you always try to differentiate. You always try to provide a good service, but you're not going to win every deal, right? You're not going to close every client. But when you do, that feels awesome, right? When you helped, and I'll just make something up. If you helped, bring in $100 million in a capital raise, for example, that's fantastic, right? And you get to take a lot of that credit, right? So I think it's the balance of, sure, if you lose every time and you never close a deal and it's been a very long time, maybe you consider a different type of role. But as long as you can, close a portion of the deals that you're working on or interesting transactions, I mean, that's a great feeling.
Right. Yeah. Nobody bats 1,000, right? Nobody bats 1,000. They've tried.
Not that I know of.
Not that, yeah. So for people kind of fresh out of school or thinking about doing a startup or kind of going into that avenue or that venture, what kind of advice would you kind of have for them, or a couple little tidbits to kind of get them going in the right direction?
Sure. I think startups are very interesting, and you can learn a lot as long as you have a go-getter mentality, right? If you go to a startup and you sit at your desk and you're not going to be proactive about, asking what you can do or how you can help, you're really not going to do much, right? And I actually like the fact that I started in a very regimented program, and I was frankly told what to do for a few years, and I learned quite a bit. So I wouldn't, be scared of the structured programs. I think the biggest thing and the bank I worked at was Morgan Stanley, where, having something like that on your resume, people don't question your work ethic anymore. And then, interviews tend to more be a question of fit as opposed to ability, right? So I think having a well-recognized institution on your resume goes a long way. And companies will trust that, that bank or your former employment, had trained you well, to be honest, right? And honestly, most of the interviews or conversations I've had about employment over the last 5 to 10 years have really more been about fit than anything else, right? Because once, again, going back to the earlier comment, once you're in general finance, I mean, you can figure things out, right? You're not going to know everything off the bat. So, try to learn as much as you can. I think the structured programs are great. If you end up at a small company, that's also great. But, make sure you have a good manager, a good boss, someone you respect, and someone you can learn from, because they really control your destiny at that company.
Right. So kind of speaking to that, who are some of those people that you would say like really influenced or kind of mentored, kind of helped you along the way, learn some new things and kind of help you out of some tricky situations, or maybe you're, kind of feeling down because maybe the deals are not going the way you want to? Who's kind of helped you through those times?
Yeah, it's a funny question because I think my answer now is different than it would have been at that time.
Both work.
So for example, my managing director, right, when I started at Morgan Stanley, from my perspective, I was just getting a ton of work handed to me, and it seemed like a lot of the things I was doing was not necessarily moving the needle, and personally, I felt overworked and tired. But really, I mean, looking back at that, I learned so much, right? I mean, who am I to say I got this amazing internship? I was able to work long hours, challenge myself, meet awesome people, work with very intellectual people. I was complaining about, at least in my head, the amount of work I was given. I thought that was unfair. I mean, that was an amazing opportunity I had, right? And a lot of the opportunities I've had since was because of the amount of work I put in at the bank. And so I don't think I appreciated those types of relationships enough, right? So basically the folks in senior roles in my first job that basically gave me work. But that is really the first, not the first full-time employment in my mind, but the first full-time employment post-college, where I basically, was, taking in as much knowledge as I can, learning as much as I can. And I did that because of all the work I was given, right? So I think I really respect those folks a lot more than I did at the time.
Yeah.
And then really when I first got
looking back on that, do you, not to cut you off, but looking back on that, do you think that that's like the confidence that they had in you? Like, hey, this kid's sharp, he's talented, he can handle this on his plate. If we throw more on top of him, he's just going to get it done. He's not going to, crack.
That's exactly right. Because if you think about it, they really wouldn't have given me work if they didn't think I can do it or produce good work. It would have just been a waste of their time. Right. So the part I didn't see in many cases, at least when I first started, was, okay, maybe that pitch deck that I spent all weekend putting together, that might have been used to close a $5 billion deal. Right. And so, sure, maybe I was unhappy for a few hours, but who cares? Right. I mean, the bank got to close a big deal, and everyone, did well and made money, and clients are happy. And that was great. So definitely.
Gotcha. No, it's good. So now, kind of moving forward, what are the next steps in digital assets? Like, what do you kind of see that future? I mean, because listening to you, I mean, there's something you talk about, that passion. At least that's kind of what I hear. You not only passion, but just like enthusiasm. Like, you're so excited on that topic, and you bring a lot of energy and passion towards it. Where do you see the future ultimately going with it?
Yeah, I think in the near term, it's not going to be too dissimilar to what companies like PayPal and Venmo did for sending money around, right? So I see digital assets as just more efficient assets, right? They can be sent more easily. They can be sent quicker. They can be sent directly anywhere in the world, 24/7. You don't need to wait until the bank opens at 9 o'clock, and you can still send transactions after the bank closes at 5. Right? You can break assets up, infinitely or almost infinitely if they're digital, right? So if you have, for example, a share of stock on a piece of paper, right? At least in the olden days, you couldn't necessarily split that up and give somebody half over here and half over there, right? If I have a digital share of stock, I mean, theoretically, I can split that up into a million different pieces and provide 1/1 millionth ownership to a million holders, right? If it's all technology driven.
That's kind of what they do with Bitcoin, right? Like, you can own like 1/1 millionth of one piece of Bitcoin, right? You can kind of cut it up, at least with that digital asset. Is that with all digital assets? Are you
Yeah, so you can actually, Bitcoin goes as small as 1/100 millionth, right? So again, good point. Common misconception about Bitcoin: you don't need to own a full one, right? One Bitcoin today is trading around, if you look at exchanges, around $11,500,
share,
right? You can own,
So is it called, like, in the digital world, is it called like a share, or is it just like
it's just a Bitcoin.
A Bitcoin. Okay.
And you can own a full Bitcoin. You can own 1,000 Bitcoin, or you can own 1/100 million Bitcoin, right? So you can have $1 worth of Bitcoin if you want, or 5 cents. So it is very much fractional. Whereas obviously the dollar, right, you can break up into 100 pennies, right? So you can send someone a penny. Bitcoin goes a little further, which again, I think is valuable as the value of Bitcoin increases, right? So when Bitcoin first started, I mean, it was trading, or people bought Bitcoin at a penny, 2 pennies. Now it's 11,500, right? So obviously having the ability to break it up makes more sense than it perhaps did when it first started.
Especially also because they're not really printing anymore, right? It's only got 21 million. They're not making any.
Yeah, so there's still some
finite.
Yeah, so some Bitcoin still, every time transactions get confirmed, and this may be getting into the weeds, more Bitcoin is released in circulation to whichever computer essentially solved that mathematical problem, right? So it's a very transparent system and design, right, that anybody can actually look into and inspect. But essentially, there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. Once the circulating supply hits 21 million, there will not be any more Bitcoin minted, right? And so if supply keeps going up, if demand keeps going up rather, and supply remains stagnant at 21 million, obviously the value of Bitcoin should be increasing as well.
Now, talk to me a little bit about those digital assets, because what does it have to go to into creating a digital asset? Because there are multiple. I know we've looked at, it's like a CoinStats or that app that we kind of looked at, where there's so many different digital assets that I feel like if you were on the outside looking in, which I would say I'm somewhat well versed from you, but being able to kind of figure out how hard is that to pick and choose a digital asset to invest in? I mean, most people know Bitcoin.
Sure.
Or,
Yeah, so it's a good question. Anybody with a moderate technical ability could actually create their own token, right? It's not incredibly difficult from a technological perspective. Okay. But if let's just say I had the capability and I created something called Zev Coin, right? If nobody wanted this, if nobody accepted it for payments of goods and services, if nobody else had the ability for you to hold Zev coin, it's not really worth anything, right? The reason why Bitcoin has so much value is because of the adoption that it's had over the last 12 years or so, right? So you've had this insane increase in market value. You've had a large number of transactions being processed on a hourly basis for Bitcoin. It's being used. It's being accepted by merchants and vendors, and that's why it has value, right? And so I guess the way I'd answer your question is, if you're looking at these different types of tokens, right? And one common website is coinmarketcap.com. You'll see a list of, a few hundred of them. Look at the ones that people are using, right? And which will be essentially represented or reflected in their market cap. And so if Bitcoin, for example, has a market cap of 215 billion, great, that's being used by a lot of people, right? Ethereum, I'm not sure, it's less than that. And same is true there. But there are all these other tokens, and it goes down, to the very bottom of the list where, you might have a token that has a $100 market cap, right? And that's not being used by anybody, right? And so really, if you're looking into tokens, right, what value does it provide you? Who's accepting it? How many computers are on the network verifying these transactions, right? That all has to be taken into account. I will also just say that anything I say should not be considered as investment advice. But if you're looking at general exposure to the market, look at the larger market cap tokens, and that's today, at least, Bitcoin as number one and Ethereum as number two.
Right. So Zev coin's it's going to be $100 cap value is what we're looking at.
Honestly, Zev coin might exist. Maybe another Zev out there created it and sold it, but no, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Nor am I using this podcast to sell some Zev coin over here.
We could get it going. This could be it. This could be the brainchild for Zev coin. $100 cap value.
That's a scary thought.
But it is kind of, speaking to that, it makes it a little bit for, especially, I would say, older generation and older audience, kind of a little bit scary to jump in to digital assets when some 15-year-old in the middle of the country can come up with their own currency. And is that why there's been kind of a little bit of apprehension with it so far? What would you say?
Yeah, well, people need to realize how much, maturation there's been in the Bitcoin space. So, right, obviously when it first started, it would have the same problem as Zevcoin has today, right? Who's using it? Who's sending it? How many wallets are there? What can you do with it, right? And Bitcoin obviously has gone through that process over the last 12 years and has gained quite a bit of adoption. When it first started, though, you needed to be quite technical in order to hold Bitcoin, right? And in order to secure it yourself, and you need to understand how to manage, these, keys. Obviously, when you think about your bank account, right, and you go to Bank of America or Chase or JP Morgan, you now just need to remember your username and password, and then you can send Bitcoin, right? And so those types of companies have now come out in the digital asset space, right? So Coinbase, for example, you don't need a hardware device. You don't need to be an engineer. You just go on, you go through their KYC, which is know your customer. You upload an ID. You create your accounts, you create a password, and then you connect your bank account and you buy or sell Bitcoin. It's actually quite easy. And so I think, and the easier it becomes for people to actually get exposure, the more they understand it, and the more adoption there should be, right? So if, for example, right, let's say your grandparents can open up their Charles Schwab app or their Fidelity app, and maybe there's a buy Bitcoin button, and maybe they press that and get a little bit of exposure. That's pretty easy for them, right? And I think long term, you'll just see Bitcoin as an option in any sort of portfolio, right? Do you want to buy more stocks? Do you want to buy more bonds? Do you want to buy virtual currencies? Excuse me, how do you want to diversify your portfolio?
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit of a stretch for my grandparents to get on an app and go through the banking, but
you'd be surprised, yeah. Well, look, and that's why, but that's why all these companies have started that actually provide a, very easy to use interface, right, and essentially manage all the security on your behalf. Is for that very reason, right? I think most people don't expect their grandparents to, buy a little hardware device and manage a private key. But sure, if they can go on and create a bank account, then they can go on and create an account on a website that supports various virtual currencies.
Now, kind of just getting into finance, digital assets, blockchain. Before all that, kind of starting out, where did the drive and kind of the ambition start for you? because as long as I've known you, there's been a ton of drive, crazy amount of work ethic, always kind of like to be moving and grooving. And where does that drive and ambition kind of come from for you?
I always, as long as I can remember, which is maybe a sad thing to say, but I always thought that I wanted to get into finance, right? But I didn't really know what that meant, right? And it has a ton of different meanings, and obviously every company, every job is different, right? Even a term like investment banking. I mean, there are tons of groups within investment banking, and they're all very different roles and have very different responsibilities. And so I didn't quite know exactly where in finance I wanted to go, but I know that I liked that industry. I liked, the small, application of, math, and I like the fact that you get to deal with people. I just thought that it seemed very interesting and worked for my, skill set at the time. I think that I was lucky that I ended up at Northeastern University in Boston, because they had this great co-op program where you spend, 6 months at a time, basically these extended paid internships, right? And so by the time you graduate, you go for 5 years. You may have 3 full-time 6-month internships, fully paid, with real companies, in real roles, right? So, for example, I worked at 2 different investment managers in Boston, and for my last co-op, I actually did that at Morgan Stanley in New York, and that really helped me get a sense of what I wanted to do, and all those jobs are very different. When I started to learn more about the investment banks, right, so like the Morgan Stanleys of the world, the Goldman Sachses of the world, I was just super impressed with how successful they've been, how many companies they've helped, all the smart people at these institutions. And so I just said that I wanted to really get into one of these summer analyst programs, right? So there are these really intensive 10-week programs where you're working maybe, 14, 16 hours a week, sometimes more, sometimes your weekends. But you learn a ton, and it's a great, bullet on your resume that's going to help you either get a full-time position there or somewhere else. Right. And so I thought that this would be like a really great entrance into the finance world post-graduation. Fortunately, I was able to land that Morgan Stanley summer analyst program and get a full-time offer from them. And then I really just learned more about how the finance world worked, right? What does an investment banker actually do, right? It sounds cool, but like, what do they actually do?
Yeah.
When you're at an investment bank, it's called the sell side, right? You're helping clients access.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there you have the sell side and buy side. The buy side is what you would consider, private equity, VC. You're basically managing money on behalf of institutions. You're making these investment decisions. You're making, you're probably buying shares in an IPO. But really, you have this pool of capital that you're either investing with or buying things with. And the sell side, you're really providing services, right? So investment banks, they're not managing money on behalf of like other funds or family offices for the most part, right? The primary activity of investment banks is to provide services to companies that are looking for capital, right? And so you're basically being paid a fee for your services, but you're not managing a pool of capital like an investment fund would. And so again, I had no idea what that distinction was, before I actually got into the space, right? And so then you start to learn about sell side versus buy side. You start to learn about like venture capital and private equity. The reason why I hopped to startups was I spent some time on the equity capital markets desk at Morgan Stanley, where that group's role was actually to take companies public, right? Okay. Or sell their shares if they're already public for additional capital. And so, take, Uber, for example, right? Uber, has been a private company, right? If they want to go public, right, they basically hire an investment bank, right? And they sell their shares to public investors, right? But the investment bank is the one that facilitates all that, right? And I was like, well, why couldn't I be at that company as opposed to raise money for that company? And so I thought that if I can be at a startup that does so well that it eventually goes public, I thought that was actually then, the next stream, right? And that's kind of what led me to start thinking about these smaller startups on the West Coast. And I thought, wow, it's great to raise money for a company, and you're doing, a very important, function, and you're obviously helping the company operate. I thought it would be really cool to actually be on the other side, right? What if I helped build a company that we took public, and generated, success for ourselves and our shareholders? So I think it just depends on, where you fit, in the finance world, and understanding that there are so many different types of opportunities with so many different roles and responsibilities is very important. And I certainly did not realize or recognize all that while I was at school.
Right. So going to that other side and kind of viewing it as the Uber that's going into
Mhm.
to what kind of experiences has that been? Because you're so well rounded now, right? I mean, or more well rounded. You could always be more well rounded, but I mean, you're well versed on kind of both sides of that business. And now with Avanti kind of moving forward, how much has that kind of shaped and kind of helped you grow in the new reality of what your business looks like?
Well, I think being in startups has helped me a lot personally, and it's really helped me in the roles I've been over the last, call it 5 to 6 years. So, I think where it's been most impactful is how to raise money and what investors care about. And so, obviously, startups are building products, they're selling products, but in order to grow, for the most part, they need to bring in funds, right, from investors that believe in their product, that believe in their service offering, and they think that they're going to become a big company. Perhaps they're just going to IPO and continue to grow. Perhaps they're going to be bought. But I spent a lot of time just dealing with these different types of investors and just understanding, what they looked for, how they valued companies, where are they putting their money, right? They're in charge of massive amounts of money, and they probably see thousands of startups every year, and they literally need to pick which companies they invest in. And so I think understanding that process, having a lot of conversations with investors, really gave me a better sense as to how to evaluate different startup companies, right? Because
Yeah.
if I say, "Oh, working at a startup is interesting," and someone gets a call with a job offer for a startup, I might say, "Okay, hold up. It actually depends on what they do," right? I mean, any company can technically be a startup, right? So, what product do they offer? What problem are they selling? What's their total addressable market? What are their return expectations? Do they need more money to grow? Right? There are a lot of important questions that investors are going to ask before they actually put money behind the project. And obviously, if you don't have money to grow the company, you're not going to be able to make it that far. Right. So I think it really helped me understand what investors look for before making an investment decision, which of course is important in any company that you're a part of that is growing or is currently a startup and looking to become larger and actually produce products and services.
I mean, it seems like you have to have a certain amount of vision to be able to see, all right, what's the future going to look like? Where are we going from here? And kind of piggybacking on top of that vision, like when do you know that it's time to like, okay, I kind of need a pivot and maybe I need to look somewhere else, or like, okay, I need to put my head down. I kind of need to persevere. We need to bring in more capital. We're going to kind of be able to make this work.
Yeah, I think pivoting is a really interesting question, right? If you're at a startup and maybe your money is running out, maybe the product you built isn't selling, right? It's either you maybe sell the company at a loss, or you pivot and continue to work, right? If you really think you're right and maybe the market just doesn't yet understand your value, then you continue to build, right? And hopefully they come around. But I think every company goes through a maturation phase, right? And so one of the companies I was working at, for example, we did, this online lending, right? So instead of going into a bank and applying for a loan, you can go to a website, you can fill out an application in minutes, and you can literally have money in your bank account the next day, right? So it really, turns the whole traditional bank process on its head. And
Yeah.
instead of spending 2 to 3 weeks at a bank, you spend, 5 minutes in an application and you get your money next day, right? Well, okay, what happens? Maybe that product's successful, but you can't just always sell one product. I mean, you're going to want to expand your offering. And so at the time, we were selling and issuing 3-year loans, right? And so our customers wanted longer period loans, right? Because a loan that has a longer term actually has a lower payment, all else equal, right? So maybe you say, well, I can't afford a $500 a month payment. Maybe I want a $300 a month payment, right? And so, okay,
Yeah.
great. Maybe we should offer 5-year loans, right? But then that comes with other issues and challenges, right? Because if, let's say, there are more defaults with that product than the other one, you might need to adjust your model and your pricing, right? Everything you do that's new presents new opportunities, but also new potential problems as well. And I think responding to your customers, developing new products, improving your existing products is all super important. And look, if you're in a position where you really need a pivot, and thankfully I haven't been at a company where there's been an extreme pivot. All the smaller companies and startups I've been a part of they've generally stayed along the same direction and the same path. But you may have made some slight modifications or adjustments to your product timeline or how something works or what customers want, et cetera. So I haven't been in a super difficult position from that perspective, thankfully.
Yeah.
But again, I think just making sure to remain competitive, You're always going to have more competitors come out, right? If you have a good idea, you're not going to be the only one with that idea forever, right? So how are you going to differentiate yourself from, company B, C, and D, right? Sure, maybe you can undercut them on price, but then if you're in a price war and everyone just keeps undercutting each other, that obviously doesn't work long term either. So you need to actually have a differentiation, right? So do you have better technology? Do you have more friendly customer support staff? Do you solve a different problem? What makes you different, and why are customers going to go to you as opposed to someone else?
Yeah. No, it is really something as simple as customer service. I mean, it's something that is so simple, and then at the end of the day can totally be absolutely make or break. You don't.
Oh, sure. For me, customer service is super important. I
Yeah.
mean, if I have a negative experience with, customer service rep on the phone, I might hang up, cancel whatever that is, and start with another company.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. So I kind of not only speaking to that, but speaking to once you have a good idea, other people are going to start coming to market, right? I mean, have you started to see that now with Avanti? Is there starting to be some competition? Because I mean, it sounds like some pretty good ideas. So I would imagine you're going to start to
Yeah.
run into that.
So it's funny. Historically, the incumbent banks, so the large banks in the space, that are just providing your traditional dollar services to companies, right? So what if a company needs an online bank accounts? They need to be able to send ACH payments, wire payments, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
None of these banks were providing any services related to digital assets, nor, from my understanding, did they have any short-term plans to do so. Interestingly, a couple weeks ago, there was an announcement from the OCC that essentially provided the green light for nationally chartered banks to provide services for digital assets.
Okay.
And so for us, that means, okay, maybe we don't have as much of a head start as we initially thought, right? And so we need to make sure that we're able to get to market in an efficient manner and that we have an awesome product, right? So now, some of these large banks have the green light to get into the space, which, on one hand is great for the industry. This is great for digital assets like Bitcoin, because
Absolutely,
it means
yeah.
that more, partners will be coming in, more customers will be coming in, more people will presumably hold Bitcoin in the future. So it's great for the space, but this also may mean that we have increased competition as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just, makes us stay very narrowly focused on our products, getting ready for launch, and making sure that, we're providing something that our customers want, right? Because at the end of the day, if you launch and don't have good service, that's not going to work out for anybody.
So moving towards the launch, what are the day-to-day vital priorities? You wake up like, okay, I got to take care of this first. And are you, because I've had people on before that say, you know what, you take care of the most difficult task of the day first, get easier stuff done on the back end, or how do you like to kind of go about attacking your day?
So I try to, I say try to because I don't do this every day, but I try to clear out my emails from the previous few days. I don't like to leave people hanging for a response for too long. I just don't think it's very considerate. And so I try to, unless it was a spam email that I can ignore, I'm not talking about that. But I try to really get my responses into the emails I received so that people don't think I'm ignoring them or don't think that they're important, et cetera. Right. So I try to do that at the start of the day. I like to, on a piece of paper, obviously I work on a computer these days. On a piece of paper, I'll actually put down my top tasks either for the day or for the week, and I'll put little boxes next to them. And when I'm done, I literally cross it off. Right.
I
like to have as many.
That, right? Even
It
with all
feels
the
so. It feels
apps
so
that they've
good.
created and everything else, like just
Well,
being
I
able
know
to
my piece
write
of
it
paper is
down
never,
and checking it. Like I do the same. Like it's for me, it's just so much easier, or it's more rewarding, rather than typing on your phone, like actually writing out and be like, all right, that's done. Check that off.
Well, I know my Excel has crashed many times and my piece of paper has never crashed. So
Yeah,
sure,
true,
maybe
definitely.
the dog can get it. Maybe someone will light it on fire, but it's really, proven itself over the years. So I don't like to have tasks that go on over multiple days. And look, of course, you're going to have some projects that might take a few weeks or even a few months. But the things that I can get done same day and the things that literally just take, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, I'll just do it, because if I don't, I'll forget about it, right? And I might need to wait for a follow-up email from, a potential partner or customer before I get back to it. So I like to try to clear out
on the front, right when it kind of shows up, the first 10, 20 minutes as you get it, like, all right, I'm just going to take care of it now, get it over with and done, and kind of move on from there. No
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if I don't respond to an email in 2 or 3 days, for example, there's a good chance I might not ever respond.
Mhm.
So I just try to clear them out,
Yeah.
every other day or so.
Mhm. No, it definitely makes sense. But there is also that power of procrastination too, where when there's a deadline. Did you ever have that for school or for in business, where you have that one deadline and you wait? It's like Matt Stone, Trey Parker, 7 days to air. I mean, those guys are the highest paid procrastinators in the world. I think they have they wait until the last possible second to get that thing submitted.
I would still consider myself a procrastinator, but because I've done it for so long, I know how much time I need to get
Right.
something done.
Yeah.
And so, if, for example, I have 7 days to do something, but I know it only takes me a day, I might wait 6 days to do it. If there is uncertainty with timeline and deadlines, I will try to get it done as early as possible. But it's funny you say that. I still would consider myself a procrastinator. But obviously procrastinating over a long period of time is never good, because you also increase the probability of forgetting something or
Sure.
doing something incorrectly.
Right. Now, talking a little bit about that kind of uncertainty, how much has the uncertainty of everything that's going on with COVID kind of affected the business?
Yeah, look, COVID came out of nowhere, right? Obviously, it disrupted a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals and lives, and it's really hit hard in a lot of places. Luckily, the company was formed in January of 2020, and our CEO, had really intended for the company to have this remote first mentality, right? We have employees that like to be remote. We have, and in the digital asset space, it's a new industry. If you want to get the best software engineers in blockchain, right, in Bitcoin, in digital assets, they might not be in the state you live in. They might not even be in the US, right? So we actually have international employees as well, right? And obviously, if you have international employees, you're not going to require everybody to come into an office on a daily basis. That just doesn't work, right? I mean, maybe in the future, just not today. And so we actually intended for the company to be able to be fully productive while being remote. We started out with daily Zoom calls before COVID really hit, right, and before we really knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And so from a work and business perspective, I can happily say that we didn't miss a beat. Quite frankly, it actually probably made us work even more, right? I mean, we didn't spend time commuting. We didn't spend time, wasting in the hallways, right? The proverbial hallways.
Yep.
I sat at my desk, I did work, I took some breaks. But I was, at my desk quite a bit, as well as others were, and we were able to be very, very productive. And so in hindsight, it was an awesome decision by our CEO to basically build this remote first mentality in our business, and we're going to have an office in Wyoming, and we need to per Wyoming law, but we have been very productive with remote culture, remote work. We're all very comfortable with Zoom and calls, and of course, look, a lot of business today happens remotely, right? And even the podcast we're doing virtually, and we're doing this on Zoom, and it's great to have this. But sure, I mean, sometimes I miss the physical interaction, and we have a very select number of meetings and events that we still may go to in person under specific circumstances, but certainly not like what we used to pre-COVID. So hoping we can get back to that one day. Travel becomes a little safer, but for us, again, we're working every day remotely, and we've been very productive at that as well.
Yeah. So kind of, it's super. I mean, it's great to be able to have that leadership kind of up from the CEO, and as we touched on earlier, that kind of vision, right? To be able to be like, hey, I think it's great to be able, you look for talent. Talent is talent, and not all talent, as you say, is in one state. So you go out, you find it, and then you kind of work your way through the situation. And it sounds like you guys have not skipped a beat at all when it comes to that.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? And even just the logistical issues of moving sometimes, right? You're not waiting for an employee to move across the country. You don't need to pay for their move, right? So it's also more, as long as people are functional and productive, it's more cost effective, right? Of course, look, you could have a situation where maybe it doesn't work out, maybe someone doesn't like remote work, but then they probably wouldn't be working for us anyways.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the podcast is going to be in person eventually here. Once kind of the next one we do, hopefully we'll both be having a little whistle pig together.
Sure, I'll come visit in person for the second session.
Yeah, that'll be good. Well, any one thing I always like to ask, I've been trying to get my reading game up on point. Been a lot of audiobooks. I actually just am on Walking or Talking to Strangers, Malcolm Gladwell, super good book or audiobook, I should say. But anything you kind of would recommend to some of the listeners out there for whether it's getting into digital assets or kind of just success or kind of helped you along the way?
Sure. Can I recommend 3 books? Is that allowed?
As many as you want. I
Okay,
got. Let me
great.
grab a pen
Only
just so I
because
can write some of
it's
this
hard to
down.
pick one.
Yeah.
On the finance side of things, and this probably relates a little more to venture capital and private equity, but Ben Horowitz wrote "The Hard Thing About Hard Things," and it's really highlighting what the book is about. Is it highlights all the very difficult decisions that founders of companies or executive employees need to make when building their company. Right. So if you
Okay.
think about, things like layoffs, right? If you think about pivots, right?
Mm.
When do you actually recognize a failure? Do you give up, right? How do you, how do you fire, an executive, right? And it goes through really the most difficult decisions that folks would need to make in those types of situations. And he gives his insights on how to handle those, which I thought was extremely insightful. And again, back to the earlier points where you're going to run into all these issues and problems when running a company. Other people have run into them in the past. And so, if you can learn from that, that's fantastic. And he's a great writer. So that's one. The second one would be Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. And
Okay.
basically the premise is that when he looks for investments, he really looks for ones that can, when you go from 0 to 1, that's basically like an infinite jump, right? If you go from 1 to 2, you're basically doubling that.
Yeah.
You can't double 0 to 1, right? Like it's this
Right.
massive shift,
Yeah.
right? And so it's these companies like, Google and Facebook that he would consider a 0 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, again, talking about, the interest that he and others have in companies that have the ability to really just massively grow,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I thought that was fascinating, right? It tells you that, you shouldn't necessarily be shy in your ambitions. Some companies will change the world, right? Obviously, some companies have already, and there will be new ones.
Well, here's what
But
PayPal, right? I mean, PayPal is definitely a 0
yeah,
to 1, I would say.
for
I mean, I
sure.
think that definitely qualifies. The world before PayPal is a much different world
Sure,
than
yeah,
it is
and
now.
yeah, I mean, even a company like Amazon, right? I mean, these are 0 to 1 companies
Yeah.
that basically have changed the way that we live, quite literally.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was fascinating. And then on the Bitcoin side, don't be turned off by the title, but it's called Mastering Bitcoin.
Okay.
And there are some technical components of the book. You can actually, and what I did the first time I read it, I just skipped all the coding and read all the text.
Okay.
And I maybe retained 50% of it, but that gave me a much deeper understanding as to how Bitcoin works and how the network works and why it has value. And so really, I remember, putting that book down after I read it, I took a deep breath and I said, wow, that was awesome. So I think that was a really good technical book. There are others, and that author, Andreas Antonopoulos, is great. He has some others that are a little more introductory that readers can look up as well if you want just some more general exposure to digital assets, why they've come so far, how they work, that I can also recommend. And some of the names are escaping me. But, again, I think I don't read as much as I should. Thankfully, audiobooks have come out,
They
and
are a
that's made it
lifesaver.
easier to stay on top during travel if you're on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think Andreas Antonopoulos on the Bitcoin side is seen as one of the biggest evangelists in the space, and then the other 2 books on the venture capital side I would recommend as well. Those are just a few of the books that I really enjoyed over the last couple of years.
Okay, good to know. I got them. I have those written down. Where can so Avanti? What's the website? Where can people kind of go and check out what's going on there?
Yeah, so the website is not actually fully built out, and so it's avantibank.com today, and we really just have a landing page because we haven't, we've been so focused on building our products and getting ready for launch that we'll update that in the near future. But there is some basic information there. But we've also had some great articles written recently, just based off the milestones that we've hit. So whether it was recent funding rounds, our charter application acceptance. And we actually gave a glimpse into some of the products that we're building as well. So if you just type in Avanti Financial Group on Google, you actually see some of those recent articles, which will give you some good insight into what we're building.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, my man, for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me in the arena. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a blast. All right. And next time we're having the Whistle Pig in person.
Here, I'll cheers you with my seltzer, but we can do that for the next one.
Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot, Zev. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Bobby. Always a pleasure. Bye.
All right. Bye, guys. Bye.